We'll begin this meeting by acknowledging we're meeting on land that has been under the stewardship of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat for time immemorial. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet, live, and play on this land. And we thank all generations of Indigenous peoples from the past to the present who currently continue to extend the sharing of this land with us. We recognize and deeply appreciate their ongoing connection to this place, and we also recognize the contribution of the Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples who now make this region their home, and who have both shaped and strengthened this community and our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and ongoing importance of Indigenous peoples to the area must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across the country. Now, is there a declaration of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Councillor Ratcliffe.
Dave G. Burrow's request for the nullity bylaw exemption.
Okay, and thank you, and I think at some point you need to make a written declaration to the clerk as well. Anything else? None. Presentations. Watson and Associates, Phase 2 of the Asset Management Plan. Coming up on Zoom.
Good morning, members of council, and through you, Ms. Mayor. Are you able to see the presentation okay?
Yes, you may start. Your name is Ian Sede.
Yes, my name is Sade Jain, and I'm a senior consultant with Watson and Associates. And today I'm quite pleased to present to you the township's 2024 asset management plan for its non-core infrastructure assets. So if we could start the presentation and move to the second slide, please. So starting off with a bit of a background, our firm Watson Associates was retained to assist the township develop its asset management plan. And there's three main objectives that this asset management plan accomplishes. So first and foremost, it brings the township in compliance with the July 1st, 2024 requirements of Ontario Regulation 588-17, which I'll detail further in the next slide. It also establishes a level of service framework, which will be used to track asset management progress in the future and to set performance targets. And then lastly, although this isn't a requirement of the OREG, this plan also establishes a sustainable level of long-term funding to maintain current levels of service for non-core assets. And this long-term funding target is, which I'll also detail further along in the presentation, is very much a preliminary number that will be refined as the township develops its asset management plan to meet the July 1st, 2025 requirements of the OREG. Move on to the next slide, please. So what are those requirements of Ontario Regulation 588-17? So Ontario Regulation 588-17 is the regulation that governs asset management planning for municipalities in Ontario, and it was filed in December of 2017 under the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act. The regulation sets out a number of requirements pertaining to municipal asset management plans, and those requirements must be met in a phased manner as illustrated with the timeline that you see on this slide. The first step was the development of an asset management policy, which is a fairly high-level statement of commitment to asset management planning and lays out the principles that will be adhered to as the township progresses on its asset management planning journey, along with the roles and responsibilities of key stakeholders. Next, municipalities were required to prepare asset management plans for their core infrastructure assets by July 1st of 2022. And the OREG specifically defines core infrastructure assets as being roads, bridges, and structures, and any asset that is utilized in the provision of water, wastewater, and stormwater services. And then by July 1st of this year, municipalities now need to include all assets in their asset management plans. And the asset management plan for the township's non-core infrastructure assets is being presented to you here today. And then by July 1st of next year, municipalities will now need to further build out their asset management plans and look at proposed levels of service or level of service targets. And then have a plan for working towards those stated level of service targets. By 2025, the asset management plans will also need to include a detailed financial strategy, which will consider sources of funding and address any funding gaps that may exist. Move to next slide, please. So in accordance with the phased rollout of OREG 58817, our engagement with the township has also been structured in phases as outlined in this slide. The first phase included the completion of an asset management plan for core infrastructure assets and included some summary level information regarding the assets, things like asset ages, replacement cost, condition. It also included a level of service framework that will be used by the township as a starting point to track and report on the performance of assets. And then lastly, it also identified 10-year forecast of life cycle expenditure requirements to maintain current levels of service for core infrastructure assets. And the asset management plan that is presented to you today is in continuation. So moving on to phase 2, it's a bit of a rinse and repeat of the process that was undertaken in phase 1, but now instead for non-core infrastructure assets. And then following the completion of this phase with today's presentation representing the final component of phase 2, further work will be needed over the next 6 to 12 months to expand the asset management plan. In consultation with yourselves, members of council, we are going to be setting levels of service targets, establishing forecast of life cycle activities that need to be undertaken with respect to those levels of service targets, and then finally developing a comprehensive financial strategy to achieve those targets. So in a way, what we're presenting here today, it can be viewed as an interim asset management plan that will continue to evolve and expand over the next year and even beyond that. Next slide, please. So now jumping into some of the asset management plan highlights for non-core assets, and if we can move on to the next slide. So as you'll see on this slide, the township's infrastructure assets are valued in current 2024 dollars at approximately $192 million. Of that, approximately 150 million is core assets, which include 194 kilometers of roads and 3 structural culverts. The township's non-core infrastructure assets are valued at approximately $42 million and include 25 facilities, various fleet and equipment assets, and land improvement assets. As you'll see on the bottom donut graph that you see on this slide, facilities comprise the largest share of the replacement cost for non-core infrastructure assets at approximately 27.5 million. Followed by fleet and equipment assets at approximately 11 million, and lastly, land improvement assets at approximately 3.7 million. The township's infrastructure assets represent an overall replacement cost per household of approximately $160,000 per household. And what that number is meant to highlight is that each and every household also owns a bundle of the township's infrastructure, which needs to be which needs upkeep and maintenance and sometimes major repairs, just like a house that you would own would. Effectively, every resident and every visitor to the township owns infrastructure that they sometimes don't know that they own. And it's therefore important to have a systematic approach to managing the township's assets so that these assets hold their value over time and don't deteriorate or depreciate in value over time through the deterioration of their performance or condition. Could we move to the next slide, please? Presented in this slide are the township's current approaches to assessing the condition of its non-core infrastructure assets. The condition of facilities has not yet been formally assessed by the township, and an age-based proxy is not being used for facilities because of the poor correlation between age and the condition of facilities. As you can imagine, facilities can be maintained in a good state of repair for long periods of time through ongoing maintenance, rehabilitation, and replacement of individual components regardless of their age. So things like roof replacements, furnace replacements, replacement of windows, flooring, etc. It is recommended that the township completes condition assessments of its facilities, ideally through building condition assessments performed by qualified assessors. This would enable the township to not only determine the overall condition of its facilities, but also understand the upcoming capital expenditure requirements to ensure facilities are maintained in a good state of repair. The condition of fleet and equipment assets is assessed based on age relative to useful service life. And this is a very common condition assessment methodology for these types of assets. However, as you can imagine, age can sometimes in spots be an inadequate measure of the condition of fleet and equipment assets. Sometimes you'll notice that fleet and equipment assets will continue to perform adequately well beyond their expected useful service lives if they're regularly undergoing their scheduled servicing and if preventative maintenance is being performed on them on a regular basis. It is therefore recommended through this asset management plan that the township develop a condition rating system for its critical fleet and equipment assets based on their observed physical condition. And then lastly, for land improvement assets, their condition is also being assessed based on age relative to useful life. Again, a very common condition assessment methodology for these types of assets, with the one exception of sidewalks. So as I'm sure you'll understand, like facilities, age is sometimes a poor proxy of condition for sidewalks, as sidewalks can be maintained in a good state of repair through ongoing maintenance, things like crack filling or grinding of trip hazards, or replacement of singular sidewalk base can quite often maintain sidewalk segments in a really good state of repair without having to replace the entire segment. It is therefore recommended that the township develop a condition rating system for its sidewalks based on their observed physical condition and conduct sidewalk condition assessments regularly. And through the next phase of this asset management plan, we will be working with the township to tackle the physical condition assessments that have been recommended through the development of this asset management plan. So what you see in this slide is the condition assessment for the township's fleet assets, and the average condition state of all fleet assets based on their age relative to their useful service lives is assessed to be in a good condition state. That being said, you may notice that there are a number of assets on the far right of this chart, and those are 4 fleet assets that have been assessed to be in either poor or very poor condition based on their age relative to their useful service life. They represent a current replacement cost of approximately $620,000. And these assets belong to roads and fire services. So as I mentioned earlier, the township should verify the observed physical condition of these assets. And if these assets are assessed to be adequately fulfilling their functional requirements, or in the case of fire assets, continuing to meet their annual certification requirements, their condition ratings and remaining useful service life expectations should be revised based on those observed physical condition assessments. Next slide, please. I believe it's one slide above. Thank you. So like fleet assets, the average condition state of all equipment assets based on their ages relative to their useful service lives is also assessed to be in a good condition state. What you'll notice again on the far right of this chart is that there are 14 equipment assets belonging to various service areas that have been assessed to be in poor or very poor condition, again, based on age relative to their useful service lives. These assets represent a current replacement cost of just under $400,000, and it is a recommendation within the asset management plan that the township verify the physical condition of these assets. And then lastly, for land improvement assets, again, the average condition state of all land improvement assets based on their ages relative to useful service life is also a good condition state. And so overall, for fleet, equipment, and land improvement assets, a fairly positive condition assessment for those assets. What you will notice here is that there are 5 asset pools, specifically for lighting, fencing, and sidewalk assets that have been assessed to be in poor or very poor condition. And these 5 asset pools represent a estimated current replacement cost of approximately $480,000. And the largest share of that $480,000 belongs to sidewalks at approximately $365,000. And as I mentioned earlier, age is typically a poor proxy for the condition of sidewalks, and it is recommended that a formal condition assessment program be developed for those assets to not only more accurately represent their condition, but also to plan for their upcoming renewal needs more comprehensively as well. Now moving on to lifecycle management strategies and providing a brief overview. So in the context of asset management planning, lifecycle management strategies are the specific actions that are performed on assets to ensure that they continue to meet their functional requirements or to extend their service lives. The lifecycle management strategy section in the asset management plan presents both a 10-year forecast of lifecycle expenditures, as well as a long-term funding target required to maintain current levels of service for each asset class. And that long-term funding target is established by estimating the average annual lifecycle cost for each asset class. Since asset management planning is both an iterative and an ongoing exercise, both of those values will be further refined through the next phase of the asset management plan, and specifically as council determines the desired levels of service that it wants its assets to provide to its residents and other stakeholders, and also as the township continues to advance its data maturity. At this stage of the asset management plan, or the township's asset management planning journey, it is important to understand the concept of an average annual life cycle cost of each asset and its importance in ensuring financial sustainability. So taking an example of fleet assets, for example, some fleet assets are quite long-lived and may not need rehabilitation or replacement for a very long time. As an example, let's say that we just bought a vehicle, and let's assume that based on annual usage, we expect that vehicle to have a service life of approximately 15 years. So even though we don't expect that vehicle to require replacing over the next 10 years, we should be budgeting to put 1/15 of the replacement cost of that asset away each year, thus ensuring that sufficient funds are available to replace it when the time eventually comes. And without this level of long-term planning, we would be placing an inequitable burden on future generations having to play catch-up in later years as the asset deteriorates and gets closer to requiring replacement. Now, with something like a building, however, which has many different component parts that may require replacement and rehabilitation on different timeframes, the process of estimating an average annual life cycle cost gets a lot more challenging. And until there is more data on the township's facilities at a component level, ideally through the completion of building condition assessments, an industry standard approach is being utilized in this asset management plan to estimate the average annual life cycle cost. And this approach utilizes the annual reinvestment rates for facilities that have been presented in the Canadian Infrastructure Report Card and applies them to the estimated current replacement cost of each building. So although this approach does not identify the specific components that are coming due for rehabilitation or replacement, based on assessments by industry professionals, it ensures that sufficient funds are allocated for the rehabilitation and replacement of components as they come due, whichever components they may be. The average annual life cycle costs that are presented in this asset management plan represent the long-term funding target to maintain current levels of service. And through the next phase of the asset management plan, the township will be setting its desired levels of service, and the average annual life cycle cost will be further refined to represent the long-term funding target to achieve those desired levels of service. So the number that I'm about to present to you in the next slide is very much preliminary and will change and be refined with respect to the levels of service targets that council will be setting prior to the completion of the 2025 asset management plan. So based on the modeling approaches described in the previous slide, the average annual life cycle cost for the township's non-core infrastructure assets, again, to maintain current levels of service, is approximately $1.2 million. As you can see from the slide, the current life cycle funding target, or the average annual life cycle cost for fleet and equipment assets, is approximately $500,000. For facilities, it's approximately $600,000, and for land improvement assets, it's approximately $100,000 annually. And in developing these values, special consideration was made for the township's two ferries. For the township's ferries, the average annual life cycle cost incorporates a mid-life cycle rehabilitation to ensure that sufficient funds are allocated for the replacement of key components as they reach the end of their expected service life. So things like replacement of a motor, replacement of a generator, electrical panels, things of that nature that require rehabilitation or replacement prior to the replacement of the entire ferry itself. And then lastly, looking at the forecast of life cycle expenditures over the next 10 years. So total expenditures over the next 10 years required to maintain current levels of service are forecasted at approximately $10.4 million. Based on the best information that's available on the township's assets, the current backlog is estimated at approximately $1.5 million. And this backlog number represents the current replacement value of fleet, equipment, and land improvement assets that have been assessed to be in either poor or very poor condition based on their ages relative to their useful service lives. Similar to the average annual life cycle cost, the life cycle expenditure requirement forecast also incorporates a mid-life cycle rehabilitation for the township's 2 ferries. Again, this is a very preliminary forecast, which will, as is the case with the average annual life cycle cost, this will also get further refined with respect to the level of service targets that council will be setting. And then moving on to the last slide to conclude this presentation, I'd like to briefly detail the next steps in our engagement with the township as it completes its 2025 asset management plan. So the next phase of the township's asset management journey will begin with a data refresh for core infrastructure assets to incorporate any additional data that the township has developed over the past 2 years and to update all the analysis that were developed as part of that 2022 asset management plan. The township will then develop scenarios for levels of service targets, determine the appropriate lifecycle management strategies to achieve those targets, and assess the financial impact of those scenarios through the development of a comprehensive financial strategy. The financial strategy will be used to balance the level of service targets in each scenario with the financial condition and the financial realities of the township. These scenarios will then be presented to council to determine the township's preferred scenario, and that preferred scenario will then be incorporated into the township's 2025 asset management plan. And then following the development of the 2025 asset management plan, the township's asset management journey doesn't end there. The township will then need to determine the content and format of annual updates to council on asset management progress as is required by the OREG. And that finally brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'd be quite pleased to answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you very much. It's a very detailed report, and yes, there can be a lot more if we make a few comments on. Councilor Duwanicky.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. One question. Is this based on existing assets? Can you see future expansion of population, offering more services, more buildings, or just based on what we have now, maintain status quo for the next 20-25 years?
Yes, through you, Ms. Mayor. I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing, but if I understood your question was in regard to any growth-related assets that the township might be assuming over the 10-year forecast horizon. And those growth-related requirements will be assessed as part of the financial strategy that will be developed in the next phase of the asset management plan. So the financial strategy is going to be very, very comprehensive. As I mentioned, it's going to incorporate all the various different financial realities of the township, including things like debt capacity and existing debt requirements, things like where the reserve balances are. And certainly, if there are any growth-related items that have been identified either through a master planning process or any internal assessments that the township has completed over the years, those growth-related items will be incorporated into the strategy, and we will be assessing the financial impact of those growth-related items that have been identified.
Sir, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hall.
I have no question.
Thank you, Councilor Saunders.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 questions. Just to clarify, the assessment's based on age or expected lifestyle the assets themselves, there's been no, visual inspection, is that correct?
That is correct. At this stage, the physical condition of assets has not been incorporated into the condition assessments presented in the asset management plan.
Okay, and then the second question would be, actually, to our CEO. When I look at our current food works plan, I see we have up with phase two. What I'm seeing here is a lot of additional staff is required to bring stuff. We've got something that we need to actually, I guess, readdress the work plan or something that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I will actually put this over to Jess, can you do a better answer?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. This is phase two, this report, so there's gonna be a lot of work for phase three. I think you raised a good point. I don't know if phase three was added into, 2025 and beyond, or even work that will be doing in Q3 and Q4. But like you said, this will be a significant time commitment from staff. I still think there's a lot of work to be done, obviously, the building assessments, sidewalk assessments, figuring that all out, so. As far as phase two, that part is complete with today's presentation, but phase three, the work kind of begins right away, so.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. There were a few things that jumped at me in that and alluded to them, that one, the sidewalk aspect. I do know the age of the sidewalk, however, they are in very good condition, so is there a level of expertise that is required? Do we have to have an engineer's report saying our sidewalks are in good condition, or can our public works director, managers, photos and visualization of it to document that? Not to say that eventually they will need support, but they were basically put in back in 72, I believe. And we are really actually in very good shape.
So perhaps I can take a first stab at that question and pass it off to administration. It is recommended that a formal condition assessment program be developed for sidewalks. Now that assessment could be undertaken internally through staff. And I'll look to administration to answer that question of whether staff internally are qualified to make those assessments.
Okay.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I will verify with our staff and get back to everyone.
Okay. Also in this report, it mentions ferry ownership, that to my knowledge, the Simcoe Island Ferry remains owned by MTO. And there seems to be a bit of a question mark around the actual ownership of the foot ferry on Howe Island, since it's retrofit potentially. So we'll try to get that clarified. But at this point in time, I don't believe that MTO has signed over the new Simcoe Island Ferry, in which case they retain all ownership of it. The seniors housing and that. The value of it, how did you come to the value of, I think it was 2.3 million? Because I don't think we built it for anywhere near that.
Yeah, so the replacement costs of facilities were all estimated using a common approach, and that common approach uses benchmark costs provided in some well-established benchmarking tools that are commonly used in asset management planning. And those benchmarking tools provide us with a per square foot cost and incorporate regionality into those per square foot costs as well. So those per square foot costs were then subsequently applied to the square footage of each facility to determine the current replacement value of those facilities. And just to provide some high level context, those benchmark costs are based off of the prior year's construction activity that has happened within a specific region.
Okay, and just going back to the concept of currently we're still using age for the value of our equipment versus actual maintenance and usage, because we are islands, so we aren't covering off hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of roads as you would be maybe on the mainland. That we have a very limited, that they're well-maintained roads for the most part as your other asset management plan indicated, but I just looked at the figures here and that, and what do we need to demonstrate that our fleet is really up to the job? What level, is it maintenance records, or do we have to have it independently assessed? Because we'd like to have a more accurate figure on it.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and through you, Ms. Mayor. Um, it is quite often the case for fleet and equipment assets that asset managers or staff who are frequently utilizing those assets can quite readily assess the condition of those assets. And furthermore, quite readily determine what the upcoming asset renewal requirements are for those assets. If an equipment asset is assessed to require replacement based on its age relative to its useful service life, you may be able to have a sort of a one-sentence conversation with someone who utilizes that asset on a daily basis to say, oh, look, this equipment asset may actually last us another 2 or 3 years, so on and so forth. And so for fleet and equipment assets, it really is recommended that an internal condition assessment be completed, and that condition assessment will be developed, or our recommendation rather is that condition assessment be developed through internal assessments of the remaining useful life of those fleet and equipment assets.
Okay. Thank you very much. So you're, if I'm correct, you're anticipating feedback still from our staff that may yet adjust any of the figures of this report, or just moving forward to the next phase 3 report?
Yes, so the feedback and the further consultation that we will be undertaking will be as part of the next phase of the asset management plan to develop the 2025 asset management plan. So the 2024 asset management plan is presented to you today, and really the way to look at it is that it is a summary of the best available information that the township currently has on its non-core infrastructure assets, and this really is where the township's journey begins with respect to asset management planning for its non-core assets. So all the consultation and the further feedback will be as part of the next phase for the 2025 AMP.
Thank you very much. CAO has a question.
No, I have a motion after.
Oh, okay, we're gonna have that. Okay.
Moved by Councilor Ackley, seconded by Deputy Mayor Saunders, that council thank Watson and Associates for their presentation of phase 2 of the asset management plan for the township.
Okay. And we got a mover and a seconder to say.
Councilor Ackley, Deputy Mayor Saunders.
Thank you very much. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we have presentation by Terry Lynn on save the date for National Indigenous Presenters, October 7th through 10th, 2024. Welcome.
Thank you. Sego, Sconagoa, Sego Fuego. Welcome, Red on Terry Lynn Brennan Units. Dinigyan Haga British, Nadarudan. Uweno West, Ito de Lunugari, Shwigan and Jitteron. So, hello, welcome. Thank you for having me. I identified my name in my ancestral language of Mohawk. I also identified that I live on the island in that opening. And I do also identify mixed heritage of Mohawk and Irish and English respectfully, as well as my family's nations. I also welcome you to this event. If some of your ancestors are not originally from here, I'm very glad that you are part of this landscape now and share. So this is gonna be quick and more picture colorful, hopefully, than the graphics and bar graphs and everything. So basically, I'm here just to inform you, but also to look for an endorsement letter at the end. But we'll start with what I'm here to inform you about. So basically the art of visiting. It's going to be a national gathering happening here on the island from October 7th to 10th. Unless it can be changed, Oh, I see, you're just gonna do it that way, okay. As opposed to PowerPoint?
This is PDF right now.
Oh, okay, so I had it set up as a PowerPoint because every slide has a dual message.
Bear with me down one moment.
Okay. Sorry.
I gotta go over back to the.
She's just setting up the share screen. So.
So, as I just said, and again, it's getting kind of like this. So it's happening from October 7th to 10th. This will be the first annual National Indigenous Presenters Gathering. There have been 4 regional Indigenous Presenters Gathering, but only in the Atlantic provinces. So there's never been an opportunity for Indigenous presenters to come together. Next slide, please. Next slide. And so the Wolf Island Hotel is going to be the location and base for the event. Currently, Lodgepole Arts Alliance operates outside of there, and Tom Harper from the hotel is here in support and solidarity, and I can speak. And basically, we are looking at possibly upwards of 30 folks to attend from across the country. Indigenous folks in the art sector. So when I say presenters, if you're not familiar with what that actually means, it means artistic producers or stage managers or festival coordinators, powwow, management, anything along those lines. So it's Indigenous people who are actually putting Indigenous artists out there and on the stages, in galleries and so on and so forth. The non-Indigenous sector obviously has these people. You've all, I'm sure, been to a show. It was coordinated by a presenter. And so the Indigenous community doesn't. We operate right now through the non-Indigenous community when it comes to our arts presentations and on those stages and in those spaces. And so what I'm trying to do as a national community is come together and share ideas with each other. I also hope to possibly lobby the use of the community center if the weather is accommodating. We have 3 yoga teachers that are already confirmed, so there might be a morning of yoga if anybody that is up for that on the island would be great. And then possibly log out to Big Sandy Bay. Next slide. And so what exactly is this? The art of visiting is the title or the theme in the sense that Indigenous peoples used to share and communicate and collaborate and meet with each other across nations. We didn't always fight. We actually didn't fight a lot. as many people like to think we did. We had to work together to live off the land, because as you all know, living off the land is not an easy thing, and so if we didn't work together, the land would have been destroyed much sooner than what it's at right now. And so we want to get back to exchanging ideas, sharing each other's knowledge, and growing our arts and artists across this country, and exposing non-Indigenous people to Indigenous arts and artists. And certainly, given the community that we have here on Golden Island, and I think that we are a community of arts and artists. We have a very large population that work out of here, and we're surrounded by beautiful art here in the gallery today. So it's very, very opportunistic that I'm doing this presentation during the summer. Next slide, please. The scheduled events will take place over those 4 days. There will be dinner, food opportunities out of the hotel. There will be workshops on the land, and a gathering. This is not exclusive for Indigenous artists or folks that are local. Any of you are more than welcome to come and learn, and celebrate, and participate even in workshops or any of the other gatherings and showcase performances that will be going on. I have a couple of artists already confirmed. One is Twin Flames, who will actually be on the mainland on the 7th, is going to come here and be part of our event on the 8th. And Christine Friday will also be becoming a dance showcase, and I'm not sure when yet, but she's also confirmed for participating. Next slide, please. Next slide. And why is this important? As I kind of alluded to, at this time of revitalization and reconciliation, Indigenous peoples are looking to reclaim their own spirit, their own pride, and their own collaborative efforts. And the arts is one sector, and I will say the most probably advanced sector that is able to do that and showcase Indigenous peoples and their cultures, their languages, their ways of being in a way that's humble, that is exciting, and yet very informative. All of our dances, all of our artwork actually tell a story that is mostly about our past, our ancestors, the way we have coordinated and operated on this land for time immemorial. This event is going to be that opportunity where we bring Indigenous peoples to Wolf Island, a place that used to actually have the caravan theater groups of old in the 70s that came here and used to perform on the landscape. That's the Indigenous caravan. It's also a great way to boost up the nature of Wolf Island as a community and itself that nurtures art and artists. And it's got a great rural feel where your land is very accessible. There's not a lot of concrete. There's a lot of trees. The wind is blowing. It's a great place to show off. And as a full-time resident, I love bringing people over to the island and showing off their space. Next slide. So it is meant, as I said, to not only bring people together, but it's about stabilizing the health and safety of Indigenous peoples in communities with one another. We don't have a network. We don't have a support system in the arts across this country, let alone across the globe. And I work with Indigenous artists from around the world. And so creating something that is actually going to be broader and outside of Canada is really a desired attribute. And there's no reason that part of that can't have its roots here on Wolf Island. Next slide, please. Again. And so, what I kind of wanted to just bring back to the table is on September 14th, 2020, I actually issued a letter to Mayor and Council to enact a few projects, if you will. And one of them actually had to do with supporting a space for Indigenous arts. The original name was Sharing Wolf Island. But since then, we have evolved to become Zoological Arts Alliance. But I wanted to remind council and mayor that at that time, on the 20th of, September 14th, 2020, the council did vote to endorse a letter in support of the creation of an art space here on Wolf Island. We have been collaborating with the hotel in supporting that art space and Indigenous art space as part of the hotel's evolution over the last 4 years. And so now, in the use of that, I'm looking, if you could go to the next slide, please. I'm looking for the opportunity of this council to endorse the next event that we're doing, which is this event in October. Lodgepole Arts Alliance is still looking for land to build a creative space. We've been looking for land here on the island for some time, but we're also exploring opportunities in Kingston. And if you maybe get the Kingston Web Standard, you would have saw that we made the front page 2 weeks ago Friday, because we are one of the frontline organizations looking to purchase the Long Point Farm in Kingston. And that could be one of our main hubs, but we are not leaving our current office and home here on Wolf Island. Next slide. And so as Canada lacks a space where there is an opportunity for Indigenous peoples to own land, build the building, program and operate, that doesn't exist in Canada. It doesn't exist anywhere around the world on public land. This is our objective. This is our long-term goal. And that was also part of what the council in 2020 helped support and endorse. Next slide, please. And so I'm looking now for this council to endorse this motion that the Council of the Corporation and Township of Frontenac Islands receive for information the delegation provided by myself on behalf of the Lodgepole Arts Alliance for information purposes, and further that a letter of support be issued concerning the proposal for the event as identified in the delegation materials. So, so here's just to save the dates right now. Electronic version. And thank you. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening, for your smiles.
We'll have questions too.
And
Okay, Councilor Dublani.
Great presentation. I've been here 15 years. First time we've done this kind of program on Wolf Island. I've never seen it be done before on Wolf Island. So it's the first time or?
so last year we sponsored 2 Indigenous artists during the garden party at the hotel. 3 years ago, we sponsored an Indigenous film night where we had 2 rounds of producers, Indigenous film directors and producers. One came, the other one came by Zoom, because it was still a little bit of the COVID time. So yeah, for that here on the island. We also work with Pros and Cons through Chris Brown as well. And so we've been in the background kind of supporting the hotel and different initiatives that have been going on there. We have a garden. We have one of our little gardens at the time. But we're also supporting events in Kingston. We sponsored 2 authors at the Kingston Writers Fest last year. And so we were at Skeleton Park this year. We're just slowly trying to establish ourselves. And we have funding from the Ontario Arts Council for this event. And there are other funding pockets that are going to be coming as well. Federal government as well as from tourism. So, I mean, if this council also agrees to maybe put some money aside for us, that's even better, but I wasn't gonna go there off the top. But certainly, I'll let you discuss that. Yeah,
I have to get out more often, thank you.
thank you for the question.
Councillor Holton?
So I think it's great, I wish you luck. The only, I guess the only thing that come up for me is, what is the logical, like, what is your group, with who's involved, I guess, so we have a little more background.
Absolutely, and so Lodgepole was formed about 5 years ago as an ad hoc group. We became a not-for-profit in 2021, and we became a charity last year in July 2023. It's a vision out of my colleague JP Longo, who does have a quote in that presentation there. And him and I are founders, as well as Paul Chaput, who is Métis and also lives in Kingston. He's a musician, acclaimed musician, Juno Award musician, author and film writer. JP Longo has been an acclaimed artistic dancer, choreographer, and musician himself. JP and I are both from Six Nations. I'm just an administrator. So even though I've been in the arts and culture world for 35 years, I've been more behind the scenes. I'm a licensed archaeologist, so I come at that end. And what's happened is we began a project with Artsfield Ontario 5 years ago, looking for Indigenous creative spaces for Indigenous artists to actually do their art in a safe place, in a welcoming place, a place that actually knew and knows and understands their cultural needs. And there was a fund. And so over that period of 4 years, we put together a feasibility study that ran in parallel to Lodgepole. And so Lodgepole's whole intention is, as I said, to buy land and to build a green, sustainable, activity-driven space that is meant for artists to come and co-create. So that it's built by Indigenous engineers and architects with Indigenous artists in mind. It will be rooted in the cultural ancestry of this land, because this is the Eastern Woodland landscape. And so the Haudenosaunee ancestry is mostly going to be influenced, and this is. And so after that, what the building becomes called, we're not sure, but as a not-for-profit, that's what that is. We have 3 elders that are part of the organization. Judy Montgomery, who's Algonquin, Brenda, who is Mohawk, and Al Stater, who's Oneida. Al works at Queens, Bertha works within the school boards in Kingston, and Judy lives in Sidmouth, and she's an author. We also have a co-lead, Rhonda Cronk, who is our secretary. She operates out of Edmonton, Alberta. We have another visionary who was an original member but had to bow out, Harmony Johnson Carter, who is from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. We then also have Taylor Norris from the city of Kingston. We have Britt Johnston from Bellevue. We have I gotta ask this question, isn't it? So a lot of our folks are from the Ontario region, a few folks from Six Nations, a few folks from Ottawa region. But we also range based on the work that I do with you.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Saunders?
Thank you, Member. Thank you for a very professional and enlightening presentation. I think we have to know where we've been before we know where we get to. So if I can just ask you, Michelle, I get the feeling this is a step in the journey. Is that fair?
That's very fair.
And we will play a role in that, but we're not sure what a role is. But
That's very fair.
thank you.
Councillor Acton?
Just had the Deputy Mayor Bill Saunders. The journey that you're coming here, why did you choose Ohio
I just
or
logical.
Lodgepole?
Wow, where do I start on that? So I grew
Right, well.
Okay, yeah, so I grew up just down in St. Lawrence.
Yeah.
Overlooking New York, so Mohawk ancestors, I mean, this is all our land. And so I lived away from it for a long time, I came back and met JP at a very, quintessential time, 6-7 years ago. And, things were just coming out of, Truth and Reconciliation 215, so there was a lot of energy, there was a lot of movement going on in the landscape of people wanting to do the right thing, quote unquote. And where I live on Wolf Island, I actually live in an area of village sites, there's archaeological sites at Buckhead. So I'm surrounded by my ancestral items are all around me, and I feel that I look down the St. Lawrence River, as an archaeologist, I'm so excited, and then I started to learn more about the fact that there was an Indigenous caravan that used to come here in the 70s and 80s for Indigenous theater performers. This was one of the stops. And then other people used to talk about the fact that Wolf Island then links with New York, because that's where, the bulk of our nations had many homes going down the Mohawk Valley. So this land, it really is a reclamation of coming home and to revitalize and to replant. And it's the perfect space. We're not in the middle of an urban city, and yet we've got this beautiful landscape that just calms the nerves the moment you kind of get off the ferry.
Second question. Did you write this?
Yes.
Just there's one line in here that says, what is currently called Wolf Island. That just scares me. Well, I don't like the word currently. It means that they might want to change the name or something to the other. It's the way it's worded.
Well, I mean, that's what its name is right now, but because it wasn't the original name. So it can also, that's what the intention of that wording is that Wolf Island wasn't its original name.
So it's their intentions to change it because it's written. That just.
No, it's meant to have you think about the original name, which is now on the signs, right? And you get all, because that's one of the recommendations that was part of the 2020 letter that's in front of you, was the 2 Mohawk language signs, the Wayno West, the Wayno Day, Long Island Standing, is the translation for what the island was originally called prior to 300 years ago. So it's not so much about changing in the future, unless you want to go back to the original name, I certainly would, that it would be a permanent thing.
Anything else?
You're welcome.
Okay, just since you brought up the history of this. I actually have quite a different history of this. As a matter of fact, this area was one of the first sales, and it was done by the Mississauga First Credit to the Crown, with the condition that the Haudenosaunee never be granted any land in the area, because this land used to be the Wendell, which means island people, who were literally driven away from the area because of the Haudenosaunee raids. And when you mentioned Oneida, separate and apart, that's certainly part of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations. And so that's why in the end, Changanega was set up specific and set apart because of the assistance that Molly Brandt and the Crown had in that. But when the sale was done, it was with the Anishinaabe Nation. And when we recently got a letter last year from the Algonquin asking us for acknowledgement, I said, are you saying that this is part of Algonquin territory because you're not on the mainland? And they said, oh, no, not trying to claim anybody else's territory. But it sounds that the Haudenosaunee are certainly trying to claim Wolf Island territory when that wasn't the case historically. So I take umbrage to it.
Mayor, I would really challenge all of that, given I'm a local historian and would like to know where you've got all of that information, because that's certainly not entirely accurate. The Mississaugas were here because they were originally from the Sault Ste. Marie area, that's their home base. And they came down at the time of the Beaver Wars between the Algonquin and the Haudenosaunee, the British and the French. And they sat on the sidelines and watched all of that rivalry and fighting going on until both nations were somewhat decimated, and then the Mississaugas claimed all of this their own. At the time that they sold it, in October of 1783 on Carlton Island, there were two Haudenosaunee chiefs as well at that session between the Mississauga Chief Minas and Crawford. And it was simply so that the Mississaugas allowed the Haudenosaunee folks that fought with the British to come up through Joseph Brand, and Joseph at Tynega stopped there, because that was after here, stopped there, didn't like it, and then went down to Glen Brantford. Tynega is his indigenous name, and Deseronto was his chief captain at the time. He stayed in Tynega to form a community there, and that's why Deseronto was named.
Right.
So, I mean, the north shore was shared with the Algonquins for hunting and fishing. If you go to the Mississaugas at Alderville, I've had many working conversations with folks there about sharing this land, and certainly the district funds through them. But I've never heard that, oh, I know for a fact the Mississaugas, this is not their original land. This is the original land of the Wendat, not the Wendat, different nation, Wendat, who are now in Quebec. And I mean, I hate the Iroquois term because it's all archaeologically flawed. And that's something I've been fighting for 30 years and have a lot of people now listen to. But it's all Haudenosaunee community, because the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat are cousins. We share language, and we share language root, and cultural root. So there's a difference in understanding how that evolution happened.
Okay, but the Haudenosaunee were never part of the signing agreement. It was only
Yes,
the,
there were two nations. There was a Seneca chief and a Mohawk chief that actually sat there with Crawford and Minas, and Molly Grant was there as well to be translated.
and the Lucas used to be the Anishinaabe word for Long Island standing up. In our books long before the Mohawk translation, that there was another First Nation name of this island.
That's actually a mispronunciation of language that has come about through the French trying to interpret how the Mohawks used to call this thing. That's what that is. The Wayno-Set book is what you're referring to. That's a misinterpretation by the French on the language and the writing of it, because we didn't have writing.
So since you acknowledge that you're from the Cayuga area, it's certainly Haudenosaunee. Have you got any letters of support from the elders in this area of tradition?
Yes, I presented at Longhouse 3 weeks ago. I've also I work with the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, and I have a letter from them pending, because it's taken a while for Chief Mayor to sign it, simply because he's busy. Yeah. I've also presented to Chief Dorian Davis. She's well aware of this project. And through friends and connections in Akwesasne, they're also very aware of this project.
Okay, so as I said, any letters of support local that you could leave on file that are supportive, that come from this area? As in Kingston area, Cataract Way.
Okay, well, the city of Kingston has written a letter to
No, not from indigenous, not in the islands.
Yeah.
Okay,
The folks that just said-
okay, well, some of them are further away. Akwesasne is down the
And the
river.
urban community, you want, like, the grandmother's council? Is
Yeah,
what you're referring
that would
to?
be helpful.
Okay,
That would be very helpful.
you wanna see a copy of these letters?
I think it would be helpful in case down the line, we end up with any question as to how this came about, and we can say it was well consulted with the indigenous that are native to this area. Because as you said, you aren't from the island, but we have lots of.
My ancestors are from this island.
your Mohawk ancestors.
Yes. The from this, my Mohawk ancestors are from this island.
The Mohawks didn't live on the island, according to the other information.
And that's where I challenge that other information. I would like to
Came from
know.
Queens.
Oh, where,
Okay.
anyway, yes.
Could I suggest that, there's a lot of history here, and I think it's fabulous. Could I suggest that perhaps you two, meet separately and share knowledge? And get a better understanding of where we are?
Sure.
Is that a fair request?
Sure. And I still think a fair request is to get a letter from the grandmothers, because that's the most recognized Indigenous council in the Kingston area. And that could. It'd be nice to make sure that we have good consultation with the Indigenous in the area.
As someone who actually has written the history for Tourism in Kingston, I've written for several organizations at Queens and associated with the Office of Indigenous Initiatives, I'm slightly offended. And I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. And I will say, it's not meant to offend. However, I have worked extensively with the Indigenous in a variety of settings, so I like to make sure that territories aren't crossed. Or at least they're acknowledged each time. Thank you. Okay, so,
Sorry. So the motion I have is to thank Ms. Brennan for her presentation. Do I have a mover and seconder to amend if they so wish to, add the letter of support?
I would do this.
Wait a second.
We're, just to be clear, adding the letter of support. Yes.
Yes. So the amendment moved by Councilor Deputy Mayor Saunders, seconded by Councilor Holton, and further that a letter of support be issued concerning the proposal for the event as identified in the delegation material. All those in favor? Main motion is moved by Councilor Holton, seconded by Councilor Ackley, that council thank Ms. Brennan for a presentation regarding the National Indigenous Presenters Gathering in October, and further that a letter of support be issued concerning the proposal for the event as identified in the delegation material. All those in favor? Carried.
Yeah, thank you. Nessa, I'll take back.
Think they all have to because of the berries.
Yeah, thank you.
No, our canoes are way more efficient than the ferries. They
Well, that's
did
big approach.
old cars, that's all.
We got that one.
Yeah,
order,
they did.
order. Now we're at the consent agenda. For the adoption and receipt of the minutes